Hi, all. Just wanted to go over some of our work from last week and this week to come. So last week we were focused on the ethical side of things, still looking at a few different areas, transfusion, etc., as well as the Terry Schiavo case. So interesting work from last week, interesting discussion. I look forward to taking a look at your writing assignments from last week. Just let me know if you have any questions and follow up to that stuff. I do have a few quiz questions to go over. This week we're going to jump back into the law side of things, talk a little bit about compliance. So compliance is kind of my well, most of this class is my area of expertise, but in particular, False Claims Act and anti-kickback Stark issues. That's what I did for a long time for a living. So really important area of the healthcare industry, making sure that folks are compliant, be it physician providers, hospitals, other types of facilities, but as well as the payer setting. There are compliance related issues, and also huge compliance related issues in pharmaceuticals, research, etc. So if compliance is an area where you have an interest, there's a lot of work out there to be had. Everything from being an auditor to being a compliance officer, corporate compliance officer, billing, coding compliance officer, lots of different areas of expertise where you can fall into. Our discussion this week, I want you to actually go out and find a healthcare fraud and abuse case. So make sure that you're choosing a healthcare case. I've had students in the past just choose a random fraud case, securities fraud or something like that. We're talking about healthcare. So it can be anything, it can be a False Claims Act case, which is probably the most common, but also there are lots of anti-kickback, self-referral law types of things out there. And so I want you to share some information in the discussion board. And then also in your discussion, talk about, how things could have been prevented as we look at each other's cases that we've chosen. What can we do? The one thing that I will make comment on is this is not, we're looking at fraud and abuse, so we're not looking at HIPAA violations. That's an entirely separate side of compliance. So make sure you're choosing a fraud or abuse case and not a HIPAA violation case. Sometimes both of those are found in one case, and if that's the case, that's fine. But focus on fraud and abuse in your discussion. So this week we're going to make an infographic, so we're going to be choosing one of the laws or regulations that we're learning about this week, and then providing a one-page pictorial representation of that info. So a few things I will say. So you can use, I have 3 links up here, Easily, Venngage, and Pictochart. You can use any of those. You can use another program if you'd like PowerPoint or Pages, I guess. If you have a Mac, Pages is very good at creating these things as well. But it does have to be a pictorial representation. So you're going to want probably more power than what Word can do for you. With some of these, I'm pretty sure Venngage is the one that tends to be most, people like it because it's easy to make the pictograph, or it's easy to make the infographic. But when you, if you choose Venngage to use to create your infographic, what you need to do is up here, well, I'll just go to it and show you, and then you'll be able to see. So you're going to have to, let me get in here. I should have done this before. So I'm just going to choose, I'll just choose a random one here. We'll choose this one. And so you're going to create your infographic, whatever it is that you want to create. Again, you don't have to use Venngage, but this is one that really seems to stymie some folks when it comes to the point of sharing it with me. So you're going to share it in the classroom. Now, in order to actually share the infographic, you can't, I'm going to go back. If you click share, it'll tell you that you need to pay to get access to that. But what you can do is publish your infographic. You can title it anything you want, and then if you click publish here, it'll publish it to the community page. So it's just shared on a random infographic page that Venngage manages. what you'll want to do is copy, it won't let me highlight it, but copy this URL right here. You can just copy and paste that into your assignment here. So when you click into this, if you want to submit the assignment, then down here in these comments, you can copy and paste that URL in here, and then I'll be able to open it. If you don't do that, I won't be able to open it. So, so you need to have it published out in the community and then share this with me. If you choose to use Easily or Pictochart, those are both fine as well. I believe both of them will allow you to download a file, but they'll tell you it needs to be a low quality file. That's fine. I don't need a high quality file. You can just download it as a JPEG or a GIF or something like that, and share it with me. Don't download it as an Easily file or a Pictochart file. Those are very difficult for me to open, and the system doesn't recognize them either. So download them as a photo or a PDF, and that is the way to go there. So that is our work for week 6. Let me see if there's anything else in here. No, I don't think so. So let me go over a few of the quiz questions from last week. So the first question, the blank strives to provide viable alternatives that will lead to the optimal resolution of many difficult dilemmas facing patients, including end-of-life issues. So there were several different options, but our answer was the ethics committee. So the ethics committee of a facility, of a hospital, does just that. They'll serve to review ethical dilemmas, and especially when we're talking about things like end-of-life care. Sometimes there's a dilemma, confusion, maybe a patient doesn't have next of kin, those types of things. And the ethics committee of the facility will step in. There's always an ethicist on the ethics committee, someone that is expert in that area. I had the opportunity to serve on the ethics committee when I was a compliance officer, and it's a heart-wrenching thing to do, but very important work that ethics folks do. So, so our correct answer there was ethics committee. Next question is, when applying the objective standard of informed consent, and there are several different options, but the correct answer was, one must take into account the characteristics of the plaintiff, including the plaintiff's idiosyncrasies, fears, age, medical condition, and religious beliefs. So, so in looking at that, think about that with informed consent, the patient needs to be able to consent. They need to have that capacity to consent. You need to understand all aspects of that patient's background with regard to religious beliefs, age, etc. So that notion of informed consent is more than just, oh, just have them sign the paper. For example, I may have talked about this last week a little bit. I just myself consented for last week consented for a procedure that I need to have done in a couple weeks, and it was interesting because I had to sign off on probably 40 different lines of things that could go wrong during this procedure, but the provider didn't explain any of it to me. So I learned from reading that document, and of course I knew what the risks really were, but I think that sometimes both patients and providers, and patients are typically the plaintiff in a case, they kind of take for granted that, oh, I'll just sign off on this. It doesn't really mean that much. Whereas if you're not informed in your consenting process as the patient, if you have not been provided informed consent, this can cause problems down the road, especially if you do have a negative outcome, and perhaps a court of law can prove that you weren't really informed about what the risks were. So it's important that you need to take into account all characteristics, especially when we're talking about capacity to consent. A kind of a good example of that is my father-in-law right now. He's in a skilled nursing facility. He hasn't officially been deemed incompetent to consent for things, but he is, and it's difficult to manage his care. He's 6 hours away from us. It's difficult to manage his care because what he thinks is appropriate is likely not appropriate for him anymore, and that now falls on us, my husband in particular. So you really need to take into account the patient's ability and capacity to consent when you're talking about informed consent. And we did talk about that a little bit in last week's work as well. The last question, although hospitals are not generally responsible for informing patients as to the risks, benefits, and alternatives to specific procedures, hospitals, and then the correct answer in this case, in some cases owe a duty to provide patients with informed consent. So generally, if you're going to have a surgical procedure done at a facility, like for example myself, I'm having a surgical procedure done, my physician is the one that was to provide me with informed consent, had me sign the forms, etc. However, there may be some times where a patient is coming in. Well, for example, in lead up to that stuff, I had to have a CAT scan. So when I went to the hospital, I had to sign off. It was a CAT scan with contrast. I was provided with informed consent of the risks associated with the administration of contrast. So, and I did have an allergic reaction to it. So it was good that I was knowing what to look for by being provided that informed consent from the facility. So the other answer that people chose was that hospitals always have a duty to provide patients with informed consent, especially in complicated surgical cases. That's actually not the case because typically consent is, that informed consent form is provided by the surgeon, because the surgeon is really the one that can provide the patient with the knowledge they need to make an informed decision. But there are some cases where the hospital is who is actually providing the service. So in the case of the CT scan with contrast, it was up to the hospital to provide me with that informed consent, and that's what they did. So so that is our answer there, that it's in some cases hospitals have an obligation to provide informed consent. So that's all I have for this week. If you have any questions about our work for this week, let me scroll back down here. If you have any questions, if you get into using these programs and you're having issues trying to figure out how to provide the file to me, please just let me know. But otherwise, I look forward to seeing everyone in the classroom. Thanks.